going to take a non-locking or a locking carabiner and clove hitch myself to it. Like so. Lock it, check it, good. Then I'm going to pull up all of the rope to my partner, and at some point they'll be like, that's me. And probably before I've done that, I'll have taken this like little setup and just clip it to the anchor, lock it, just so it's like hung and ready to go. And actually, I want to flip this around. So it's not critical that I do that, because like right now it's kind of facing away from me. It'd be totally safe that way. The OCD in me wants it facing where my partner is coming from. And then, so the way you load these things is the same way you would load them if you were belaying off of your harness, with like the brake strand going into the teeth and the climbing strand on the other side. But the only difference is it's hanging from a locking carabiner on the anchor. And take a second locking carabiner and put it right there. When I started climbing, like these things were just kind of starting to come into vogue. And I was like, oh, like, do you need to use like a locking carabiner? And like, did a couple of climbs where I didn't. And you definitely need to use a locking carabiner. It's very important in both applications. Like some loops and carabiner, some of these loops are big enough and the carabiners are small enough that you could do two carabiners opposite and opposed. But yeah, that's important. So the main advantage of this is that like I can kind of let go, right? Like I actually can't let go. This is not a hands-free device. It's not been certified to that standard. So it's good to keep a hand on there. But big picture, like the climbing strand pinches the brake strand to make it so I don't have to like death grip the rope to keep Brett from falling to the ground. And this can also be useful if you're using one of these with a really skinny rope. So basically, if we set this thing up the same way, just like so, there's the potential for this strand, when loaded, if we put enough force on it, to cause the carabiner to flip. If you can imagine how this thing's big enough and there's so little friction in there that these two strands can slide past one another and invert, in which case you don't get any brake assist anymore. Then they're just sliding down the rope. That's bad.
A lot of climbers like the OVO because the sides holes on them are a little bit bigger, so it's way less friction. There's less sidewall you're fighting friction wise. They're also super cheap. If you climb in like silty environments like this, they're going to hold up to a lot more abuse compared to like a standard tube style device. Yeah, you're going to burn through fast. Yeah.
And so what I do pretty much every time I use this, and like you have to do if you're using a single like 8-7 or like one of the really skinny single ropes, is when you're setting it up, what you're trying to do is get the carabiner around the device. So if you pull a bite down like so, now you've got 4 strands. You can take the carabiner and clip it around 3 of them, like so. And then you can slide it up in there, and now you've got the plate trapped inside the carabiner. And like, in order for that to like flip to occur, the carabiner would need to rotate around the plate in a way that it can't do. So that mitigates that problem. Or maybe you're belaying one person with 2 ropes, if you're using like twin ropes or half ropes. If you do that, that also negates or eliminates the possibility of that flip to occur. So you don't have to do what I just did, long story short. Does that make sense? So if there's 2 ropes in there and 1 carabiner, you're good. It can't happen. Real quick, before we move on, I just want to talk about failure modes with this. Like I was talking about how it's not a hands-free device. And I think if you start using this a lot, it's really important to understand how it cannot work. And most of them involve a second rope and a second climber, but a couple don't. The first one we've already talked about, and that's just like too skinny of a rope. If you like look at the manufacturer, recommendations, they will tell you the diameter of rope that these devices are compatible with, and so try to work within that scope. But like we were just talking about, like new ropes, weird stuff happens. So there's the flipping. That's one thing that can go wrong. The other one, and this is like pretty big, is if there's something in the geometry of your anchor that keeps this setup from swinging to plumb when it gets, not plumb, but into tension when it gets pulled on, and basically just holds this thing like this, it's not going to work, right? So that's pretty key. So just assessing, the plane of your anchor basically to make sure that's not going to happen. So how many folks, when they get up as the second to their anchor, they like to clip in with a clove hitch one-handed? And the first step of tying a one-handed clove hitch is this, right? With me so far? So what just happened?
Oh, not.
It defeats the
Yeah.
pinch.
Yeah.
So that's right there a potential. It's the same mode that I just described, like something interrupting that process. But it's like a common way that people expose themselves to risk without ever realizing. I did this for years until I took my like second AMGA course, and one of the instructors was like, "So this is a thing," and I was like, "Whoa, that's a thing." So yeah, better to when you're the follower, just air clove and just drop it in there. That's a really useful thing to know if you have to lower someone. We'll talk about that later.
That's a hack.
With two people, so the two modes that when there's two climbing strands in there, if they get really twisted, basically only one of them is going to work. So if you have two strands going down, and like this is not uncommon when you're belaying up two people, the two strands just get twisted around each other a bunch of times, and one of them gets loaded, the other one's not going to function. And like even if the other is not loaded, if there's a lot of twists, like it just might not work at all. If there's any sort of like vector between those two strands and one is under tension, this one, like if it's getting loaded that way, it's that same thing where it's just going to slide through because it can't make it down to pinch the brake strand. So if you have two followers, those ropes need to be parallel to each other at all, or you need to have your hand on the brake.
It's called catastrophe knots. But very simple. You all, it seems like from your history, you've climbed quite a bit. The first one is just an overhand on a bite. And then the second one is a figure eight on a bite. The purposes of these is that they have a big enough profile that they're going to, worst case scenario, you know, if you need to ever let go of the rope that you're belaying someone up with, we can never just let go. It's not a hands-free device. We can put what's called a jam knot behind it so that if it were to slip, the knot's going to block it. And these jam knots are going to be quite important as a way to think about closing the system behind it. We're always working in closed systems, which again is another reason that we like to not use personal anchor systems and to use the rope that we're in, because when someone's tied into the end of the rope or clove hitched into the rope, that will help create the closed system. So it kind of self-reinforces all that. It's also much more streamlined. So yeah, however it works, whether it's an overhand or a figure eight on a bite, these are both fantastic jam knots. And the purpose is just, to block it going into the plate. So that's kind of thing number one. You want to dig into hitches?
Yeah.
There's two ways you all need to learn about the clove hitch: doing the air clove and then tying it on a carabiner.
Okay, so air clove, pretty much everybody knows. You flip a loop, you flip another loop, you kind of keep them in the same plane and put the second loop that's higher underneath the first loop. Gives you a nice pretzel shape. You're good. One thing that this relates to both, like beauty of the clove hitch is just like adjusting it. So let's say it's loose and I'm like, oh, I want it to be tighter. Some people will like feed rope through, and I didn't realize you could do this for a long time. You just grab the strand, it's the redirection of the strand you want tighter, and you pull that down until it's the tightness you want, maybe a little bit more, and then you can just pull on this side. That's exactly what you want it to be. So the dirty secret to the one-handed clove is it's a two-handed clove. And what that means is my free hand is right here stabilizing the carabiner. So I am tying it with one hand in that like I've got my free hand to like hold on for dear life while I'm trying to clip into this quick draw. But like it's really hard to do with like a floppy thing if you don't do this move. Like that is really helpful. And then, so I'm gonna clip the rope, and basically there's two different ways I could tie the rope around the carabiner to achieve a clove hitch. One of them is gonna work with the gate and the other one's not. So I'll show you the wrong way first. So if I go like this, I've created my first loop, created my second loop, but there's no way I can get that loop into the carabiner. So that just means I went the wrong way around the rope and I need to go the other way. So now if I come to this side, got my first loop, I need to create an opposite loop like so. Boom. It kind of happens in like an arbitrary point relative to how tight you want it. Whereas with the one-handed clove, I can like kind of customize my like interval so that it's exactly the tightness I want to be at. So that's another advantage. Anything to add?
The clove hitch is so much better than any personal anchor system ever conceived. It's infinitely adjustable. It uses the rope. It's a dynamic system. It's incredibly strong. And at the end of it, you've got the back side of it as another tie-in point, which is huge. It also continues to close the system, like I mentioned before, in an important way. So
what Brett means by the backside is just this strand.
We've got this extra strand that it's going to be the secret sauce for where we're going.
Use this a lot in self-rescue. They're very similar, right? Like they both start if you're air cloving or muntering in the same place. And earlier I was talking about the air clove. I was like, you keep them in the same plane. And what I mean by that is you don't bend them like this. And for a munter hitch, you do. The mnemonic I've heard is that you treat these two strands like the spine of a book. And you just close the book. You can close it up or you can close it down. It really doesn't matter. But you're getting this shape. That is a munter hitch. And if you're like in an industrial rigging context, then they're going to really care. Like this one's the load strand, this is the brake strand. They're going to want the load strand close to the spine. So I actually tied this incorrectly or put it in the carabiner incorrectly, and it should look like this. But in a climbing application, you can just take it from me, it doesn't matter at all. Like you're not going to break a carabiner that way, like it's fine. So as long as you get that shape in a locking carabiner, great, you've achieved your goal. And so the other thing with the munter hitches, it can be confusing, is it flips, right? So if I pull on the load strand right now, like it all feeds smoothly. If I pull on the brake strand, it flips, and all of a sudden what was the brake strand is now the load strand. And so just recognizing that dynamic is going to become important when we get into tying the munter mule overhead, if we're doing like 15 minutes or so. Cool, so that was tying it in the air. Now we're going to do it around the carabiner. And so if I was setting up to lower myself, I'm just going to clip in like so. Starts the exact same way, but instead of flipping that loop and then wrapping it, I'm just going to wrap this rope around this rope, the main load strand, and you can see it starting to take shape, and then wrap it around the carabiner, and I'm going to use the gate to do that. Right? Now I've got a munter hitch. So again, like if I'd done this, if I'd started doing this the wrong way, I can't get it through the spine. It's just not going to happen. So, okay, crossing it this way was wrong. So let's try crossing it the other way. And then I go around the rope, and then around the carabiner, and I'm good. One thing people forget a lot is to lock the carabiner. So this will come into play more with the munter mule overhand. But long story short, as soon as you put the munter hitch in the carabiner, lock the carabiner. It'll just make your life safer.
I could kind of go into it a little bit more. One way that building munters set up for lowers is going to make your systems in self-rescue be a lot tighter. Knowing the munter that can be built for a raise or a lower is a bit of nuance, which is important in terms of how your system gets tighter afterwards. And so one way that I think about it, and it took me far too long sitting in a tent doing this all by myself, is there's two strands. I've got my load strand, and then I've got my belay strand. If I'm moving into a lower, the one way I've thought about it is I build my loop on the load strand and then put it in, and then it's ready to lower. If I want to build for a raise, I build it on the belay strand, and then it raises. And so see how there's two different ways to do it? That worked for me personally. Sometimes everyone kind of learns differently. So sometimes that has helped me in how I think about it. I build my loop on the load strand when I'm lowering. L goes together, and that's helped me. So
it's called a load releasable hitch. So it's a way of attaching something to the anchor in such a way that it can be under full tension, like you could be pulling on it with like thousands and thousands of pounds of force, and you can still undo what you tied and release it and lower it in a controlled way. And a munter mule overhand is just in order the knots and hitches we're tying. So it starts with a munter hitch. And in this case, I'm going to be tying it in such a way that I'd be lowering myself. So there's that. And so like I was just saying, as soon as the munter hitch goes in there, lock it. And then the mule knot is like a little confusing. One thing that can make your life way easier is especially when you're learning it, you're tying it around a loaded strand. Just for whatever reason, if this is slack, it gets kind of confusing. What I'm going to do is with the brake strand, I'm going to flip a loop like so. I'm going to flip 2 loops, sorry, and then put 1 loop through the other. And when I do that, do you see how this strand is wrapping around these 2 strands? That's important. If I'd flipped this loop the other way, like so, and then gone through, like that wouldn't work as well. It's more of like an industrial rigging context thing. Like if you pulled hard enough, you wouldn't be able to release that. But with climbers, we probably don't ever achieve that amount of force. So this would probably work okay for what we would use it for. But just know that the correct way to do it is to flip the loop like so, and then put a loop through there. And then to tighten it, like I just kind of did it without talking about it, like I keep this loop when I tie it pretty close to the munter hitch. And then when I put this bite through, one side of the bite slips, the other like slips like this, and the other side of the bite is fixed. Grab the side of the bite that's fixed, and with your other hand, pull those apart and push it into the munter. And that like locks it in place. And then the overhand is just an overhand on a bite around this single strand. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Cool. And so like I can be like fully hanging, undo this, and I like to kind of do that. Now I can lower myself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Into a raising position. I know it's in a raising position because this loop's on the outside. I just add another loop in there. That's a clove with 1 extra strand in here. And I basically just pull on that to flip it and move that freestanding strand to the outside. I unclip it, and he's good to go. What are some concerns with that?
Open carabiner.
We're opening ultra critical carabiners, where if the rope were to fall out, that's a problem. So temper that.
Thank you.
Yes, mule. Really close to that.
Filming myself so I can remember what it looks like from my own perspective. Cloved.
Oh, we didn't really go over that much, did we? So if you don't do it right, a munter is going to be... That is not a muncher. That's just a loop of rope.
That's a bad time.
So recognize what it is not, because you'll do that.
Can you do the munter mule overhand one more time from this perspective? It's really helpful.
Munter. And here, let me just milk this side. Keep it tight so it doesn't have to flip.
So this is
Mule. Capture both sides.
the spine of the carabiner. Yeah. Strongest position. So that can be important.
Overhand.
Big deal settings. Yeah. It's not really important.
Sweet. Thank you.
So you said, good job there. Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about with friction hitches, does anybody have a piece of cord? Can I steal your blue thing? It is just the materials available. The reality is, like, when you're in a self-rescue situation, especially in this specific curriculum, you're just kind of making do with what you got. And we'll talk about how to like use any of this stuff. But these are not all created equally. Some of them will perform better and worse and have different, like, you know, pros and cons, basically. So this thing's called the hollow block. This is what we handed everybody. This is what yours will look like in a couple years. These are like the best thing. There's a reason we gave you a non-camp product in a camp clinic for that purpose. It's really good at what it does. It's just the perfect length. It's a good material. It works really, really, really well. But there's often times where you don't have this, or maybe you're using it for something else. You need something else, and you probably aren't going to carry 2 of these things. I guess you could. Dedicated cord works really well. Like just the shape of it and the texture of the weave and all that. Like it bites the rope really, really well. But it's kind of like a specific tool. Like I usually just try to minimize the specific tools I carry, and it's just the hollow block. And I find I can get by with Dyneema in pretty much every other application. The thing with Dyneema is it's just more slippery. It also has a lower melting point, but like the reality is you shouldn't be coming anywhere close to that anyway if you're just ascending a rope. Like if you are, then you've got way up, like lots of other problems. But yeah, point being, like you can carry something like this, and I'm not going to be like, don't do it, but just know that you probably don't need to. You can probably figure out how to do it without that. One thing you probably heard is like Dyneema is way less elastic, or not elastic, no, like basically it stretches less. Like elastic is like kind of a misnomer because it implies that like you could stretch it out, but you won't feel the stretch if you just pull on it. Point being, when you're using Dyneema to clip yourself into an anchor as like a tether, you need to be really careful not to fall on that tether because they do sometimes break in that application. But it's reasonable to use in that situation as long as you're just diligent. Cool. So there's 3 friction hitches we're going to go over. There's the auto block, the clem heist, and the Prusik. And kind of like we were talking about earlier, they each have different applications, and like you can think of them all like one's like a framing hammer and the other's like a finishing hammer. You know, they like you use them for different stuff. So for the auto, has anybody tied all 3 of these already? Okay, some folks. So just bear with me as I talk about something you already know. For the auto block, it's really simple. It's just a series of wraps. And the reason I was saying this thing is so rad is like, I just wrap until I'm out of stuff and it's gonna work. I should lean against the tree as opposed to the faux tree. And like, cause that's one thing you learn in friction hitches, like, well, how many wraps do I do? And it really depends on like the thickness of the thing you're wrapping around and the thickness and, you know, configuration of the thing you're wrapping with. But with the hollow block, if you just do it until you're out of them, it's probably gonna work right. And then I would take a locking carabiner and put it there. And that's it. No twists, no like passing anything through anything else. It's literally just wrapping it around the rope. This is the weakest of the friction hitches. Like the reality is I can actually hang my body weight and pull pretty hard on it, but it's not as strong as like a clem heist or a Prusik. And so generally speaking, the applications we use this thing in are anytime, there we go, I would want to like put something on the rope that allows me to let go of the rope. So anytime I'm just using like my hand, I wouldn't necessarily like ascend a rope using an auto block. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like hand strength.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any questions or additions on the auto block before we move on? Very simple to clean, which is nice. For the clem heist, I'm gonna wrap. Oh, one thing I should add is like what I do with the bar tack to make sure it's not in the way of the friction hitches and the wraps, and just to make sure it's dressed and functioning well, is I always start with, well, I pull on the sling just below the bar tack, and that keeps the bar tack out of this part of the sling, so that's not in this, the part that matters. So I'm just gonna wrap up towards like the load, or excuse me, away from the load in the direction that if I'm ascending that I'd be going, but the load is gonna be that way. So I'm basically out, and then I'm gonna pass the bar tack through that. And that's a clem heist. Pretty straightforward. And again, like hollow block, perfect amount of material.
And that one's good for ascending?
Yeah, I use this thing for ascending. Anytime it's like you need full strength. Basically, I just use the auto block to back up my rappel or a lower.
Yeah.
But those are 2 applications where it's my hand basically, right? I'll sometimes use it like in crevasse rescue, but that's not really what we're talking about here. But yeah, this is the one I use otherwise, like it's full strength that I use the rest of the time. We'll talk about a Prusik, but honestly, I like never really use a Prusik because this works. There are some applications that are very specific where the Prusik is superior, but yeah, you know, like any friction hitch, it slides up and then bites. So one important thing to know about the clem heist is they say it's like a directional friction hitch. Like I can load it this way. It's not going to function as well if I load it this way, right? Surprisingly, it's actually probably going to function pretty well. I still can't get it to slip. But like if you're using it in the correct application and properly, it only goes one way. And again, I'm going to wrap away from the load and pass the bite back down through the loop. Make sense? Questions? Clarifications? And then the one other nice thing about the climb heist is it's really easy to undo. That's like the main reason I use it as opposed to the prusik hitch, because it's just faster on and off. And then so for the prusik, it's just a series of girth hitches, right? So that's a girth hitch. If I hold this thing here and do it again, technically, if you're a knot geek, that's a prusik hitch. But the one thing we actually tie and call a prusik hitch is technically an improved prusik hitch. So you can like win climber trivia at the pub that way.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're looking for is like a smile with like a bag of donuts, right? You don't want these to be like all twisted up and kinked around each other because it's just not going to bite as well. Like we talk about dress knots frequently, and like in friction hitches, dressing is actually really important because if they're not dressed well, it might just like all not work. And that's especially true if you're using dynamite. We're going to talk about that in a second. But yeah, so a cool thing about the prusik is I can pull on it in either direction and it's going to function well. The main con with it is it's a little slower to undo. Sometimes you can get away by just doing that, but half the time it, like the bar tack or the knot or whatever, it gets in your way. It doesn't allow you to. If you don't have a carabiner, you can just girth hitch it like that to a gear loop. And it's pretty easy to grab and unlikely to fall off. If you do have a carabiner, and this is the way I carry mine like 90% of the time that I'm climbing, I'll just flip it on itself, like double on itself, do like a twist or two, and then my thumb is the carabiner. And that way it's like very small, compact, it can't catch on things. It's just like off my back hip, out of the way. And basically the solution to overcoming the fact that it's just inherently very slippery is tie it way more wraps, way more times around the rope, and then make sure it's dressed well. Like 90% of the time that I try to use these things and it's sliding and not functioning properly, if I like clean up the loops and the wraps, it works better. And so that's something I can do as I'm tying it, right? So like right now, these two strands are like parallel, railroad tracks basically. And that tends to work really well. If they are on top of each other, more like that, and I'm wrapping, that tends to not work as well. So I'm like trying to make just like a tube of material. That's probably more than I need, but we'll see. Sorry, Brett. You're good. Seems to be working. Half the time I'll do that test, and then I'll stand up in the foot loop and like stand up and it's just like, but that's like not that big a deal because I just undo it and just put more loops on. Or maybe check to make sure I dressed it well. Does that make sense? Cool. The last thing I'll say about friction hitches, and I guess I could have led with this, is like there's just a fundamental relationship between the diameter of the thing you're wrapping around and the thing you're wrapping with. And the closer they are in diameter, the more wraps it's going to take for it to work. Pretty intuitive, but worth talking about.
Behind your blade of ice, you're going to be doing a lot of this. And then just clip it back.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And one thing,
And it's nice because you're never dropping it. It's always clipped into something.
Yeah, kind of a closed down system.
one thing you'll find, and sometimes you might be wrapping it like this, which is, you see the difference from what I just had. Like before, the carabiner was clipped to this loop and I was wrapping away, and now it's going the other way. If I do this, it puts kind of a weird twist in there. It's gonna still work, like I've done that a lot, but I feel like it twists my rope when I rappel that way. So what I've gotten in the habit of doing is just fixing it to make sure it's like clean. So, yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so before we get into like how, just want to talk about like when. So we're gonna like make our partner go up, right? Like it's always easier if you're not just trying to like bump your partner through a hard move they can't do, or like maybe they're climbing something steep, fell into space and can't get back to where they need to be. It's always easier to go down. There's maybe times where going down is like a really bad idea. Like maybe you're gonna end up in like some more dangerous environment than you're already in. But like the vast majority of the time, this is gonna be a lot of work if it's not for like less than 20 feet at most. I've never had to haul someone more than like 20, 30 feet. That's like not because the opportunity didn't necessarily present itself, but just like if you can come up with a way to go down, your life is always going to be easier. But that being said, like often scenarios happen where you're like, I need to like lift this person, and this is kind of how you would do that. And so this is kind of the baseline we're going to start from, because this is like the way we're trying to inspire everybody to belay each other. Okay. So first things first, like you probably heard about like 3-to-1, 5-to-1, 2-to-1. This is gonna be a 3-to-1, and then I'll show you a 6-to-1. We're not going to delve too deep into what those numbers mean. You could, get into physics and like all that, but the reality is like, it's just more complexity than we need to get into right now. I'd rather just show you the tools, and like you learn the tools and you understand when to use them. You don't need to know that it's like 3 times the mechanical advantage, even though that's not actually true because of friction and all these other factors. It's just like, we don't need to go there. Okay. So first things first, tie a jam knot on the back of this thing, because it's not a hands-free device and I want to use both my hands for other stuff, right? Now I can let go of that thing. It's good to do that like relatively close to the belay device. It's like a general rule in self-rescue that like, if something slips, like you shouldn't have more than like 5 feet before some sort of blocking knot or some redundancy engages. Then I'm going to tie a clem heist on here such that I'm going to be pulling up on Brett. So I'm going to wrap towards him, and then I'm going to take the non-Brett side, pull away from him. And then this does not need to be a locking carabiner. I'm going to slide this as far down here as I can reach. Often this is like off of a ledge and you can like kick it down with your toe, but you don't want to kick it down until you do that. And so this is my hauling system. And the nice thing about it is it's what we call ratcheting. So as I haul Brett, any progress I make gets captured by this thing. This is also like a pretty big drawback. Why is that?
It's not releasable.
It's not easily releasable, but in the context of the haul, like what?
All the friction.
Yeah, like I've got to overcome that friction in order to achieve a 3-to-1. So I'm going to take my jam knot out because otherwise it's going to jam. I'm going to pull a lot. And this is pretty common in this environment, like where we're not actually pulling on full body weight, where it's, yeah, you see what happened there? Like Brett got heavy and like pulled the rope through the device for me. Cool. Y'all see how that works?
Yeah.
At some point, this is going to get close enough to here that I need to reset it. Very simple to do. Just relax it and push it away from me. One thing you'll see some folks try to do is like redirect this thing so that they're like using gravity, like I could flip this to me and then hang on it. Everyone's experiences are different, but I've found that if I'm in like, a vertical environment, there's usually some sort of belay ledge that I'm standing on. It's not just like straight sheer wall that I'm trying to haul Brett up. And I've found like any little foot ledge I can get on and basically do like deadlifts, that works better than redirecting it, because redirecting it just seems to add a ton of friction. It just doesn't work very well for me. Like, I don't know if you had different experiences, Brett or Nathan. Like, yeah, like it just works better to just like squat.
Yeah.
So if I'm like real small, or maybe there's a ton of friction in the system because you had a lot of rope drag or whatever, and you need more mechanical advantage, what I can do is tie a clove hitch right up in what I'm calling the haul strand here. Get it all the way out there, and then I'm going to use the backside of my clove. First of many backside clove hitch applications. And what I basically just did, this in of itself is what we call 2-to-1. I just put a 2-to-1 onto a 3-to-1, which results in a 6-to-1. And so I'm getting a lot more mechanical advantage. I'm not having to pull nearly as hard to move Brett. Since we're on flat ground, I might have to like help the rope through the device, but that's fine. Billy's really excited by what's happening right now.
He really likes 6-to-1s.
I mean, yeah. And so I can reset it by doing that, but I also sometimes might have to just retie this closer.
If you're the leader, you're stronger than your second. You climb the pitch, and your second's coming up, and they just need a little help. You know, the second can help, but they can't get through the move. That 3-to-1 is a great little just boost to help them. You also might just be able to do a direct vector and just like pull it, you know, without doing much. But like sometimes I'll climb with the second who's weak, and I'm like, I know I'm gonna haul him. I'll like pre-build my Prusik and just be belaying with the Prusik in my hand, like ready to go.
Like this.
And then inevitably I'll be like, oh, you hit the crux that I'm pretty sure you can do. Just so happens my Prusik's pre-built. Interesting.
They never even have to know.
Yeah, they don't even have to know. And then you can haul them. That's technically self-rescue, but where you're just giving them a little boost. You know, that escalates into, you know, someone's like all the way in space, you know, and you need to like maybe do it to a 6-to-1.
Yeah. Anybody ever climb monkey space? Monkey? Yeah, there's like this super steep crux pitch that it's like 11B, but it's pretty hard for 11B, and if you fall off, you are in space. And so if folks don't plan ahead, and the second does that, and they don't have the ability or the tools to like climb the rope to get back to the wall, you kind of have to do this. You can't lower them because you're like 3 pitches up the monkey and you put your ropes too short and you're in space anyway. And they can't get back to the wall because they're stuck out in no man's land. And so you're going to have to like deal with getting them to go up.
Other big consideration that we didn't talk about is like, you know, even a worse scenario, like your second is unconscious, okay, and they can't get up, and you've made the decision you want to bring them up to the anchor. If you've led the pitch, what is outside of the rope, what's also likely into the mountain?
Gear.
Every 4 to 6 feet, gear, right? So if there's gear this whole way up, and I'm getting hauled and I'm unconscious, what's going to happen on Max's side? He's going to haul and haul and haul, and what's going to happen? I'm going to get stuck in the gear, and I can't get through the carabiner, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, like, as a consideration, you know, that could potentially be a problem.
Brings up a really important consideration with hauling in general. If you're like hauling, and then all of a sudden, like, they stop moving, don't continue adding more mechanical advantage, because you can add enough mechanical advantage that things start breaking. If the system binds and your load stops going up, be it a haul bag or a human, figure out why that happened and go deal with it. Don't just try to overcome it, because one, you might break components of your anchors or your hauling system. You might also break your partner. Like, you can hurt them by like hauling them into a carabiner. So that's really key. Like, don't just like be like, I got this, you know, like figure out what's going on. And like, if you're hauling up your partner and you haven't communicated to them about it first, you should have rappelled down to figure out what's going on prior to doing so.
At that point, you're just rappelling down and getting them taken out of that situation.
Yeah.
And then going back to your system and doing
Exactly.
it all over again.
Yeah. And so in that environment, you're going to like, on your way back up, probably fix all the carabiners so
like
that.
unclip everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Final consideration is when we are manipulating these systems and creating mechanical advantage, we're beginning to put more force on our anchor. So in like a 3-to-1 haul system, don't dwell on it too much, but we're doubling the amount of force going into the anchor. So that's another really good reason to build unquestionably strong anchors. And if for any reason you've got some doubt, you built a light anchor for some reason, worst case scenario happened, you may want to consider beefing your anchor up to make it even stronger.
Would you do that if you were going to start hauling just in case anyway? Like, is that standard practice to add maybe another piece, or?
Kind of depends, you know. And then a 6-to-1, you're adding like, I think 5 times the amount of force into the anchor. So it begins to escalate pretty quickly on that. Obviously, if you're just blowing up bolts, it's probably going to be fine. But when you're building gear anchors, just something that should be in the back of your head, because you've already got a lot of issues you're working on here. Last thing you want is your anchor starting to blow out. So
I would say strive to build anchors that you would feel good hauling on. Like, they should, like, your anchors should feel as good as a 2-bolt anchor. But sometimes they don't. Like, let's just be real. Like, sometimes you're like out of the right sizes, or the anchor stance you're belaying at just doesn't offer the opportunities you need it to, and you make it work with what you got. That's a scenario where you're like going to think twice about just like going to town and hauling.
Okay, got clove pitch, and got the climber side on top, brake on the bottom, gates facing us, all of these locked. This, and then I had a 2-to-1, which is just Clem Heinz. And that guy there, non-locking, not pulled. I'd tie a catastrophe knot or a jam knot first, the brake side, while I set that up. And then for the 6-to-1, I tie my catastrophe knot again. And then I tie a clove hitch into a non-locking, and I could take in slack by pushing the Clem Heinz away. And then I grab the backside of my rope and use it to pull like this.
Using the belay device as a plate that we've been telling you to do is how to transition from that into a lower. But before we get into that, we want to explain to you what we mean by a lower and like just how to do like a basic lower, so you have an idea of where you're trying to get to in that scenario. And so, like normally Brett would be up here, but it's fine that he's over there. It's really not a big deal.
I'll come
Okay.
over here.
If I'm going to lower him, I'm going to generally do it off the anchor for all of the reasons we described that we belay off the anchor anyway. And so if I just like set my belay device up like normal, clipped it to the anchor, is that belay device doing anything? No, because it's like touching the rope a little bit, right? But it's basically just a top rope. Like it's not really imparting friction. If I can reposition myself to here, now it's doing something. But often in a vertical rock climbing environment, that's not really an option, right? Like you can't like hold your hands like this for a 5-minute lower, like that'd be exhausting. So what we can do is, and this is kind of the neat trick, is redirect the brake strand like so. And then I just clip that to the same carabiner. You'll see what just happened? Head's exploding.
Can you do it one more time? Sorry.
I can, yeah. So I load up my device just like normal. And before I attach it to the carabiner, I take the brake strand and I fold it back over once more. So now it's on the other side of the belay device. And I clip all of that to here. You can do it this way, but I find that puts like a little bit of a twist in it for whatever reason. So I usually take it off and load it up like this. The other thing, it's a really good, 2 things actually that are really important with lowering your partner. Well, 3 things. One is you should have a plan for where they're going. Ideally, they're like awake and deal. And like you can lower them to like a 2-bolt anchor if that's what your option is, and they can clip into it with an anchor or whatever. If you're lowering them to the ground, great. If you're lowering them to a ledge where they can like stand up, untie, and sit down. Those are all good options, but you need to be able to see where they're going. Maybe you can't see where they're going, but like you need to have been there and know that your rope will reach like somewhere for them to get done. Because if you just like lower them until here and they're hanging in space, like you just made your life really terrible. Yeah. And their life. So everything is worse. Don't do that. That's probably a situation where you should be rappelling. So yeah, knowing where they're going and having a plan, like an exit strategy, basically. The other thing is like, I've got a pretty carefully stacked rope here. Like I took the time to take my side and like carefully stack it, make sure it's good to go. And then the last thing, it's pretty important, is having a backup. So one, sometimes there's twists in the rope that I need both hands to deal with. Maybe we're in an objectively hazardous environment and I could get tagged by a piece of rock or ice that could knock my hand open or knock me unconscious. So just having something on the system so that if I blow it, Brett doesn't die is a really good idea. Y'all probably know this one. Anybody?
Auto block.
Yes. Yes. Anytime I tie the auto block, I test it. Try to like get it to slip. It didn't slip, so I can lock the carabiner. And this is a perfectly set up lower. Brett was probably cloven into the anchor, but we've omitted that for brevity's sake. And so at this point, I can be like, okay, dude, you can unclip. He unclips, he loads up. I'd probably swing over here to get into like best position. And away he goes. And your goal when you're lowering someone is to provide a smooth, continuous lower. And one thing I find is if I slide the prusik down as I like move the rope up, that helps accomplish that. That's that simple.
Big takeaway here is that these belay devices are really good, simple things to use, not just for up, but for down. And this provides a very clean lower that doesn't put twists in your rope. And it's like, this is a super benchmark baseline thing, and this alpine redirect that we kind of did is a super trick way of redirecting the brake strand. Belay devices work by having 2 bends in them. They don't have the second bend. They're just a simple
Piece of metal.
Yeah, doing nothing.
And it doesn't require an additional locker.
Doesn't require an additional locker.
So
you can do a separate locker higher to create that bend, but this is a pretty slick way to do it. So.
real quick, I'll just show you what that would look like. Because like, it's good to know that this option exists. So if I've got like infinite locking carabiners, which I definitely don't, I could take a smaller or similarly sized locker and run the brake strand through there. It is important that this is a locking carabiner. And then if I needed to, I could take like 2 non-lockers, opposite, and pose them here. But you can see how it like looks weird until it's loaded.
Yeah.
And now it's loaded up and the brake strand is redirected and we're all good. But yeah, like you never need to do that. Like if you remember how the first one works, just do that because it's fewer carabiners. Yeah. Cool.
And this you would use like if your partner is not comfortable rappelling. Like, what is the usage for this?
In a conservative sense, I'd say like you just want to lower your partner all the way to the ground.
Okay.
Lower them to a safe area.
Okay.
The downside of this is your communication rapidly deteriorates between the 2 of them.
Yeah.
So you really want to be up here at the belay and really dial in your plan. What you don't want is the person here being like, wait, what did you say? Like, where do I go? What?
Yeah.
You know, like that communication is totally jacked. So I would say like, really depends on your partner and like how comfortable you feel. Like, are they comfortable enough that you could lower them to a 2 and they could like build a little anchor at a 2-bolt belay? Are you lowering them to a ledge where maybe they don't need to be unroped? Be conservative with it because you can create a lot of problems here.
Yeah. To your question and to what Brett's talking about, I think anytime they're compromised or just like maybe aren't as experienced as you, like if you can lower them to the ground, that's a fast way to like get them to a more comfortable, safer environment. And with the communication thing, like the geometry of the rock that you're lowering them can be pretty important because like, you know, sometimes you're like, don't go that way, go that way. And I do this a lot at work. I lower a lot of people. And what I find works well is lowering them until they're at the point that we're going to like lose sight of each other. Because if you can see each other, usually you can communicate pretty well unless it's like crazy windy. And at that point, I'll be like, I know where they're going. I know what it looks like. And I'll be like, all right, now look below you. Do you see X, Y, and Z? And they're like, oh yeah, I see that. I'm like, okay, go to Y or, you know, whatever. But like, you can give them a lot of information here, but it's going to decay right away. So give them a little, as much information as they need until the point that it's going to deteriorate like terminally, and you're barely going to be able to hear each other and load them up, and then we were talking about a second ago where we're just going down, plates loaded, and we need to like unload it and get out of here.
So I'm going up.
Yeah.
The plan is I'm going up now, and then I get to the point where I'm like,
He's over it. He just
I need to be lowered.
does not want to be here anymore. And so one important caveat is like, if he's able to stand up and unweight the system and like clip into a bolt or just anything to get his weight off of this, makes everything infinitely easier. But we're assuming that's not the case. Okay, so first things first. Let me get this out of here. This is not supposed to be here. And this is the part this morning when I was like, I was going to prep this part in practice, but instead I walked over the hill and
rescue.
Rescue people. So if it's a little bumbly, that's why. First things first, I'm gonna close the system so I can go hands-free. And what I need to do is transfer the load from this onto something else. And what that something else is gonna be is my friction hitch here on this. And it needs to be a releasable system. And right now, I'm like pretty shy on locking carabiners, right? So an easy place to pick up extra locking carabiners is your tether. In this case, my clove hitch. So what I'm gonna do, odds are you didn't expect this, and so you haven't already done this. I'm gonna clove in like so. Now I can release this guy and get it in the system, which will make my life a lot easier. And then I'm going to tie a clem heist here. And that's what's going to hold Brett while I execute the transition. That needs to be a locking carabiner. It's going to be on the back side of my clove, right? And so if I just like clove hitch right here and release this, what's going to happen? Yeah, so this is going to load. And even if I pull it tight, now like what's going to happen? At some point I'm going to have to get him off of this, right? So what does that mean this needs to be?
A munter.
Munter.
Mule.
Yes. Nice work, team.
Like munter, mule.
Like he wants more. What does he want? I don't understand. Why doesn't he just tell us? Okay.
There's one.
So there's my munter. It's set up with my load on the clove hitch, right? Remember like the tongue piercing is the load. Lock my carabiner. Tie my mule knot. Snugged in there. When I load this thing, if there was play in there, is it a big deal if Brett like oozes down a couple of inches as I transfer the load? Not really, it's fine. There's everything, we're good there. All right, so now I gotta figure out how to like get this open. The smoothest way to just release tension is what we call just rocking the plate. If you just move this carabiner back and forth, you probably can't see much happening from back there, and it's hard because Brett's not full weight right now, so it might not actually do much, but in like a full weight environment, that will move like a millimeter or two of rope through to the point you can eventually just pull like that and it opens up. And so now this is slack. And let's see, before I undo all this, I need to back him up because in self-rescue, it's not okay to have somebody dangling by a single friction hitch without any sort of backup. Make sense? So to do that, what do I got?
Here, I'll gear pair you. So that the locker on your Prosec doesn't need to be a locker.
Locker on my Prosec. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Very.
Boom.
So that way,
yeah.
Two opposite opposed on the bite, the standing bite, clip off the bite, and then you can remove it, and it doesn't need the plate, and you can take that whole thing out.
Cool.
So
now
you just
this
did
is
another clove hitch behind just now on the two opposite and opposed.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So like, let me think about that. Well, that actually wouldn't function. I can do this instead. Pull some slack through.
Is it chilly down there?
Oh, hello.
I said, is it chilly down there?
It is very chilly down there.
It's toasty up there.
Chili sounds nice. Okay, so I can pull some slack through, clove it off here. That's because if I cloved it here, like you don't want to load this part of this hitch. It just wouldn't go that well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I've been doing that. Self-rescue?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Cool. That's a
Nice to see you. Come on. Okay. Now I'm good to like undo the backup knot and undo this because you've basically got him hanging from the friction hitch, backed up by a clove hitch that's through the equivalent of a locking carabiner. And so once I undo this, what am I doing? Like, what's my next step?
The goal is to get me down.
Just talk.
Set it up lower.
I was like, relet it. I was like, relet.
Yep. So
They figure out where.
here is Brett. Load up the belay device, redirect the brake strand, put a carabiner on there, attach to a master point. I'll put the carabiner just because. And then just gonna hold that with a hand wrap while I take this off first. So right now I don't have a friction hitch on, right? But I've got the lower built. And so what's serving in terms of redundancy in lieu of the friction hitch is my hand, right? Yeah. I could have built this with this, like I have this available, but just went with this. It's like a little bit easier to do and it's a more purpose-built tool. But to rescue it, I'm just gonna keep the rope in my hand and I've got a jam knot behind it. Okay. Back of the lower. Does that make sense?
That was a lot.
That's why Brett was like, that was the easy part. Yeah. And the one mistake I made was using a locker where I could have used an on-locker. Y'all know where I'm talking about?
The press
Sounds like where
Perfect.
you ended up doing the opposite opposed.
Yeah, like when I attached the carabiner I attached to the friction hitch with the backside of the clove should have been an on-locker. And that would have allowed you to avoid the hooky or fairing.
One other little thing with the hand wrap as the backup behind the plate. With enough slack, you can do from the plate. You can do a mule overhand, tie the plate off, and then that's going to be a little bit cleaner for you to two hands off to take the Prusik, turn it into an auto block.
Which we actually realize haven't talked about. But in the same way that we mule off a munter hitch, you can mule off a belay device. So this is looking familiar, hopefully. Flip a loop, pull a bite through that loop, jam it into that belay device. Now I can let go, do whatever I got to do. So yeah, that would have avoided the extra step there.
You're my belayer, you're on the ground. Climbed up, it got up here, and I could like build something here if I want, but we're gonna like climb and like move on. It actually makes a lot more sense for me to belay from all the way back here. Okay, so the edge is the edge over there. He's actually on the ground belaying me. Okay, like I'm on lead coming up, and there's a couple different things I can do. I could come up here. I could clove in. Blah, blah, blah. I could stack the whole rope up, and then I could rig him to come up. Disadvantage is I can't see him. I really want to see him. I want better communication. I can't talk over that, okay? So one thing I can do, or a number of things I can do, if it's a long distance like that, I'm still en belay. I can come and with my super infinite mega PAS, I can come all the way to the edge. What was your name again?
Jake.
Jake, cool. I see Jake. Sweet. Oh, this is a nice spot. I can see my person, blah, blah, blah. Come here. Double up. And Jake's down at the bottom. Okay, this strand right here is going all the way down to him. I can come here. Boom. Boom. Stack the rope, load him, and bring him up to here. So this is a good way of like a big extension if you're in terrain where the anchor is way back there. Let's say this terrain is a little bit more sketchy, you know, and it's not like unroped walking terrain. I could muncher hitch that there, belay myself down, and then belay us up with the muncher hitch. But this is a real quick, easy extension this way to do that, that I use a ton.
Is that an overhand or a figure eight on the bite? Or does it matter?
So this is a two-stranded. So this is both stranded, which I basically take both. Those 4 strands that I come around
So it's a figure eight.
and clip off to make it super strong. And this is like 12 personal anchor systems tied together. And it cost me nothing. So little hack. There's 2 other ways from that we can kind of go down that road. But I just want to show that real quick because these guys mentioned that and I thought it was kind of a neat skill that
No, that is super
And,
cool.
and you're just to clarify, you're just hanging off your bit of rope there. You're not like
I'm
adding
hanging out
another...
the back side
Right.
of this
okay.
master point right here.
Okay.
And it's a closed system.
Awesome.
This is good. Be conservative with this. This is a good way to like, if you top out on something with big boulders or something in the way in the back, you need to sling them. And then you can run it all the way back and it's like a nice high piece. And then you tie it all off on this side.
Okay.
That's a quick way to do that.
Even though you're tied in, you'd clip into that
Nope.
master point as well?
Nope. I just make sure something's in this master point. And then that's a neat master point to belay off of. And then when he comes up, this transition is going to be kind of complex. So you don't want this terrain to be like super technical. You want kind of ideally want this to be like, you know, nearly unroped terrain that way. And there's other like shenanigans you can do with it, but just to keep it simple, use this for big flat terrain. And that's kind of a simple way of doing it.
Cool.
With the expectation you could walk up to the
Yeah.
anchor.
Because you've got all the slack that you're going to need to do. You need to restack the rope. But like for maybe one example would be like ledgy terrain. You like climb a pitch, you have this huge ledge that like if you fall down, you're fine. You're not going to fall off the mountain. At this point, you can kind of like undo that, re-rig, maybe walk, you know, over to the next pitch that starts. But this is a neat system that I use a ton, kind of wherever I'm going.
Because when you're rappelling, like the guys we helped out this morning, they'd like rappel the pitch, and they just couldn't, the rope wasn't moving. Couldn't pull it. And like, could have potentially ascended it, fixed what was going on up there, or rappelled down again and then pulled it. Who knows? But with this minimal kit, basically what we're going to do is have one friction hitch here, one friction hitch here, and then the key is how we how we attach ourselves to the rope. We can't dangle from a single friction hitch, right? And one of these friction hitches is just going to be a foot loop. We're standing in, we're not actually attached to it. And so the solution is we're going to take a locking carabiner, likely a pair, just because it's going to work a little better for this, and put it on our belay loops with a clove hitch. And that way, as we climb and generate slack, we can belay ourselves up effectively with the clove hitch. So that's going to look like. Which friction hitch do you think I want to use right now?
Okay.
Yeah, that seems like a good one. What else would work? Yeah. So I'm going to take one of my lockers. So I'm in there, and I want to be backed up, right? So my backup is simply that. Pretty simple. And then we talked about using Dyneema, just like lots and lots of wraps. Can you overwrap it?
Yeah.
What? How do you know you've overwrapped it? Yeah, you try and push it up and it just doesn't go anywhere. And so basically the way this would go, it's really awkward trying to do this on the flat ground, but in a vertical environment, put your foot there, or you push as high as you can, you stand up, slide this up to it, and then sit on it. And you're just transferring weight from one to the other and sliding. If you get really annoyed by your foot coming out of that thing over and over again, and you've got enough where that doesn't fold you in half to have your foot that high, you can do that. So on and so forth. And at some point, you're going to generate a bunch of slack here, and you want to like minimize that slack. In the event that this thing slips, you don't like ride the lightning to the end of the rope. So what you can do is just milk the clove. Pull that through, and pull that through. Pretty simple.
And does the clove hitch make it so you don't have to be tying jam knots every 5 feet or so?
Exactly, and it's going to be a lot more robust than jam knots. Like, I would way rather take like a sliding friction hitch fall of multiple feet onto this thing than a random knot that will likely jam up in there, but just like this is great. It's very strong.
Big takeaways here is that that clove hitch is our main kind of like, that's our main connection point to the rope. And then this other friction hitch that we're on basically takes the weight, which allows us to move this other friction hitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the use case is difficult section or what?
Right, so probably the likeliest one that you'll use this one is falling off the crux pitch of monkey space. You're dangling in space. You can't reach the rock. Your belayer doesn't know how to haul you up, or maybe there's too much friction and they can't haul you. You need to get up. And so you would like do this. You get up to the rock, like the bolt you're hanging from, and you probably take like another quick draw that you cleaned from earlier on the pitch, clip in direct to the bolt, and that'll create slack here. You can break that whole system down, and then your belayer is going to take, and then you can go from there. Cool. The other scenario you might use this, like we were saying, before you haul someone up, they can't talk to you. You should go down and check on them. You need to get back up, and this is how you're going to get back up. So, yeah.
Any benefit to having like one of those rope, because I have one, but I don't know if I even need it. One of those rope ascenders. They're kind of like the big bulky thing from Black Diamond. Have you seen those?
Yeah, so like I was saying at the very beginning, I always carry a progress capture pulley, like a micro traction or a Spock or whatever, traction, whatever. Though that is definitely, and it will serve every role a Jumar would. But yeah, don't carry Jumar. It'd be like
it's huge and it's bulky too. It's like
yeah, like if you're gonna go like Jumar thousands of feet of rope, use 2 of those. But if you're just like carrying equipment as like a backup for in case of emergency, then yeah, like a single progress capture pulley will work really well, and like make this whole scene way smoother.
Yeah.
But it's good to know like how to do it with the bare bones. 100%. Full rappel with a rappel extension. Cool. It's really good idea, unless you're using a gree-gree. Don't ever extend a gree-gree. That just is not a good idea. But in any other circumstance, like using a plate, do that. Feel free to like circle up a little tighter so you can see what I'm doing. We were talking in small groups a little bit here and there about PASs. Brett has made his opinion of PAS is very clear. The one time I won't think you're a Gumby if you use a PAS is when you're rappelling down. But they're a great way to extend a rappel. I all the time I'll folks will have it in their backpack for the up, And then if we're gonna do like 1,000 feet of rappelling, it's like a perfect length extension. It's got a built-in clip-in thing. You can easily clip into 2 things. So yeah, it works well in that application.
So you're supposed to hide it while you're climbing?
Exactly, because Brett will shame you, honestly. He just scrolls the internet looking for... but assuming you're not carrying one of those, like I was saying earlier today, like anytime I leave the ground multi-pitching, I'm probably carrying this own double length sling. There's a lot of different ways we can extend our rappels. Kind of my favorite is I just girth hitch it. Some people don't like girth hitching to the belay loop. It's totally fine if that makes you uncomfortable. You can also girth hitch to hard points. The whole reason people are uncomfortable about this is because there was a very high profile fatality years ago, but that belay loop was in really, 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 really bad shape. That was like atypical. Like this is not going to break. And then I'm just going to put an overhand on a bite here, like so. And what that's going to do is my device is going to go in here, and that separation is what makes the whole thing work. You'll also see folks do kind of this number where they'll tie a double bite. And I used to do this for a long time, and I do like how like clean it is and how robust it is. But the reason I moved away from it is it's just sometimes too short. Like there were multiple anchors where there was like a really good ledge, and I was literally hanging because my thing was too short to reach the ledge. Kind of sucks. So either of those are good options. Point being, you should, if you're using an ATC, you should be extending it. And here we'll show why in a second. And could I have flipped that 180 degrees and rappelled on it safely the other way? Yeah, totally. Yeah, like it's lower friction. Basically, when the brake strainer is going into the teeth, it's gonna support me more. Sometimes you don't want lots of friction though, right? If you're rappelling like really low angle terrain and you're dealing with annoying, stiff, old, fat ropes, like low friction's kind of nice. Okay, and so here's the deal. The main reason we do this, extend or rappel, is for this thing. And I don't, when I'm climbing for myself, like every person isn't using one of these. Honestly, for me, rarer and rarer is anybody using it because the first person down just uses a gree-gree. Like if Brett and I were climbing together, he would have a gree-gree and I would set this up and he would just put a gree-gree on either of these strands and he could rappel. That's like what I think everybody should do. But sometimes you're carrying one of these, and like that happens to me too all the time. Like I'm like in the mountains and I'm like, I'm not gonna carry a gree-gree to climb the Grand Teton, that's ridiculous. So I need to be able to do this. And so then we're just gonna do auto block around both strands. This is where I was saying like kind of popping the gate through when you clip and just make it a little cleaner. You'll see how like if I hadn't done that, it kind of puts a kind of funky twist in there. Not a big deal, but it'll work a little bit better. And then I'll often have a locking carabiner here. That would be what I'm attached to the mountain with while I'm doing all that. So anytime I do the auto block, test it, check everything. So the main thing is like with this setup, there is no physical way for the hollow block, or the auto block rather, to touch the belay device. And that's an important part of this setup. And the reason we do it this way, as opposed to the way they used to do it, which looked like this, like for a long time, like kind of the standard rappel setup was this. And it like honestly kind of works. Like it worked for long enough that hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of climbers did it. The really big problem with it is if I lean over, my leg comes up, that thing will stop working. And I'll just slide off the end of the rope, and that actually happened to a guy and he died. That's why we don't really do it anymore. The other thing is like some harnesses, if the buckle's right there, that'll open up the buckle. That'll make that even worse. And just like that, the harness isn't designed to be loaded in that way. So
is it okay if you do an extension but still clip it to your leg?
It's not going to kill you,
okay.
But there's no reason not to do this.
was like, I guess sometimes I have like my pro in and a bunch of other shit going on right there, and so I'll just attach it to my leg, but I'll still have an extension, so my rappel will be right up here.
Yeah, yeah. I think again, like, be careful with buckles because like it's loading, like especially speed buckles, you know, as opposed to like the traditional double back situation. Like it's loading the buckle in a way it's not designed to be loaded.
Okay.
And that can create a lot of extension that you might not have otherwise been anticipating. But yeah, it's probably going to be fine. But like, I would.
But ideally, use your belay loop if you.
Yeah, it works better. Transitioning from a rappel to a lower, or sorry, to ascending the rope. So the scenario Brett just threw out there, I overshot my rappel, and I'm like, I need to go back up there to get out of here. So we can see this better.
There's some nuance here.
So what I need to do is get this in here. Do you have any tricks for standing up?
So
pretty much
it kind of depends. Yeah, it kind of depends on the terrain. You can kind of do a couple different things. So let's first just show that clipped in. So when you clip the main fin up in like that, you basically have created a plaquette on yourself. Okay, and now you can, at this point, you could remove this, and you can start ascending the rope in up mode. So these can be used as ascenders. Many people don't think about that. It's not super ideal, but like Max would then kind of come here and pull the rope through to ascend the rope. Does everyone see that?
So that kind of takes the place of the backup of what you had previously as a clove pitch. You're just needing to set up your ascent system.
I think it's actually less important that, like, you know, the backup on the leg loop thing. That the only way that you can have the ability to flip the device and go into up mode is if it's extended originally. Because if it's not,
don't have any flexibility.
You have no space to come back and clip it. So for big walls, especially where like you're wrapping into the void and you're like, I really am not sure where I'm going. I think that's probably the most compelling reason to do that.
And to be clear, that's the main advantage of the gree-gree is that you don't have to do that at all. You just put a foot prusik on above the gree-gree and start humoring.
Yeah.
Totally. So yeah, that's called like the athletic move that you can kind of do in a couple different ways. And what I would do is, like kind of pull it. Yeah. Rappelling comes in a lot of different flavors. You know, we can be in a really low angle rappel, which is pretty easy. You know, and in some of those instances, sometimes I don't even rappel with the backup and I'm just off my waist because it's just simpler and faster. And if I pass a belay station, I can like literally walk up the slab and do that. And that's pretty easy. As it gets progressively steeper, you know, and even though it's pretty darn steep, you could sometimes use terrain to kind of reverse.
You're rock climbing, right?
You're rock climbing and you're kind of just like checking yourself. You can kind of get away with that. As it gets super steep and you're like free hanging, that's when it really becomes
very athletic.
Very, very athletic. So what I would say is for the foot loop, if you have like no gear to burn, you can create the foot loop off the bottom here to help with the athletic move. Which this distance is kind of important. You got to kind of play with it for your body type. Basically take these two strands as one. And then you want to take Cinderella's foot and put it in the slipper. And so the clove pitch is nice for this because it's going to bind around the foot, try to get over the arch. Then you can stand up and kind of unweight the device to do the athletic move. And then you can kind of dump it later. So now at this point, we can kind of switch things around a little bit. One of the reasons I like to rig my tether in a little bit different way, and for this transfer, it has its advantages. But if I were to basket it here, wrap off here for a specific reason. So if we're staying strict to the gear list, this is kind of like my standard wrap setup. I like the
girth hitch.
I don't girth hitch, and I'll show you why. I like this basket. Everyone saw the basket, pretty straightforward. I like it. It's a little bit more, I got 2 strands everywhere, so a little bit more redundant that way. That only really matters when we're pulling ropes through chains, because we got moving rope happening through things, and sometimes it's nice. It takes an awful lot to like cut Dyneema. But when I come down here, I'm getting ready to go do the athletic move. If I go and do it, and I do my foot loop, and I come up, boom, I get this in here. Because this is basket hitched, I don't have to unclip any carabiners to get this back. So I can just comes through. I can undo the knot. Nice. And that's kind of a nice little benefit I've found of that system, because now I bought this back. This is here. You know, I can have a cat knot behind everything for the up. I'm gonna have an adjustable cat knot, which maybe I'll put through. Say that. Let's just pretend that that's a locker. Okay, and now I can get this prusik back. I can put this up high. Okay. Sweet. And at this point, I can take this loop here as a foot loop. Knot this off, or kind of wherever I want to be in my foot loop. And this is really difficult to explain in the horizontal. But here, I'm gonna step up. I'm gonna pull that through. Earlier, I chatted with some folks about carabiner profile. This is like mission critical here. Having a big HMS carabiner here, especially with these big fat strands, is gonna be key. Having a little D is gonna create loads of friction in order to come back up, okay? So as I'm progressing this way, I'm gonna be building slack here. I can eat that slack up here and pull it through, so that I'm not worried if some reason this were to fail. This can fail if you're not careful. We're moving a lot of rope through it. It could do stuff like this. That's fun. So just take note that that's kind of a thing. It needs to be monitored, which is why this is kind of our main mission critical backup. This is a locker. Then there's a couple other additional things that we can do here. So I've got my foot loop. I can also redirect my pull here to make this a little bit simpler and create like a 2-to-1 system. Like that's gonna be a little bit easier for me to pull up. I could also create another, if I don't want to use this and save this for something else, I can use the back side of this rope, which is totally unutilized at all. Like it's doing nothing. But I can come here, create a clove hitch, and let's just take one strand, because this is, I'll take this one strand off the back side. It's wasted rope. Come back up here, clove hitch this here, and then I could do a foot loop here, which is creating a fixed length below me for a foot loop. And then I can come and climb up this way. And this distance is always going to remain the same no matter what. As I'm pulling rope through the belay device, I'm going to be continuously mind this. And so this is an important skill to know how to do when you pass a wrap station. And this is actually the one thing in self-rescue that I've definitely done on pretty compromised rappel. The prevention thing that I always like to talk about is important when you're rappelling. It's a really good idea to have a plan. Like a lot of your rope system, the default of your rope system for the climb is very much dependent on the rappel in terms of how light of a rope system you can go, whether it's double ropes or single rope. Giving as much attention to the descent as the ascent of the climb is going to be really important. So understanding the distances for rappel stations. One example that comes to mind was wrapping off the diamond on Longs Peak in Colorado. The wrap coming down the yellow wall is 150 feet between each wrap station, and it diagonals back and forth so that it kind of doesn't hang up. So when you wrap down, you need to look on either side, and it's very easy to pass those wrap stations, which I did. But I know that if it's 150 feet and if I'm climbing on double ropes that are 200 feet long, I know when I'm 3/4 of the way down, it's at that level and I'm looking for it. I didn't realize that at the time. And I just blasted by it and I went up, oh, I need to be there. How am I going to get there? This is how I got there. And it was a total pain. This sucks. It's not a go-to, but it's a super important skill to know about. And there's definitely a progression to kind of get there. So yeah, to kind of back up the whole train and start from the beginning and as a review, I like personally the basket hitch. Start. Take that off. I basket here because I know that I can retrieve this later. 2 strands all the way through. Doesn't create a thing on the belay loop, which is not the end of the world. Come up here. I wrap on the lower one. I'm going to kind of negate my backup for the time being. Okay, I'm wrapping. Oftentimes I like, just as a habit, of just clipping this off back here, just to close that system. Wrap, wrap, wrap. If I need to come up here, I got this carabiner or another one. The clove hitch here. Boom. Step up, do the athletic move. Blocks me. And then here I don't have to open this carabiner because I basket hitched. To get this back for free without having to mess with too much stuff. And now I can begin rigging my system of how I'm going to ascend. Double stranded is really hard. It sucks. It's functional though.
Like one thing you could do is use that move to transition to using the fixed ascension method we talked about, where you're using a waist press, and they'll honestly be easier to ascend.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you can ascend that way with a waist press. The big takeaway with those 2 Prosics, it's a great idea is to have a back adjustable clove behind everything.
Yeah.
Technically, but those 2 Prosics, if you don't have that, you need to be clipped into those 2 Prosics. But I think the adjustable thing. But these devices are sweet for that. So that is kind of rope ascension. So if we want, we can break up into. Do you have anything you wanted to add here? No. Good. No. There's also, actually, I'll just show it. There's other extension methods, which it really depends, I think, from climber to climber, kind of what they're into. I think some other guides have got into this like offset basket thing, which is also kind of cool. Kind of come here You do this. And here you could have your belay device on one side, and this gives you a little bit longer extension over here. That's kind of cool. Yeah, so there's lots of options between the girth with a knot to the offset to the full basket. Those are kind of your three alternatives there. So, real quick and easy way to wrap with them is do it's like spider rappel, basically just like an offset bite in the middle here. The belay device is up here. Depending on the person and how conscious they are, I often, and maybe I want your input too, Max. So one person can go on this side, one person can go on this side. I often like to clip into the lower one. It allows me to cradle under the person and kind of protect them a little bit. The inverse is also true sometimes. Some rescue people like to go up front and throw the back person over their shoulder, and they're clipped in here and protect them from the wall. It's all kind of situation independent. Another way to do this is to make these even. One person's clipped on one side, one's on the other, and if you need more stability, you can shoulder each other to get down. Do you have any thoughts on?
It just depends on the terrain, the injury, and all that.
Totally. But going down with someone is really key. In a lot of rescue scenarios, like the other person's going to be freaking out. And if you're like, I'm just going to go lower you 200 feet now, all on your own. Best of luck. See ya. They're going to be like, ah, so they want to be with you. And so I definitely encourage just a standard like spider rappel is a pretty good one. One other kind of tandem rappel thing that I'm going to talk through, which is a very common rescue scenario with beginner climbers. Since you all taking this course, sort of, you signed this up for a reason. You're likely leaders within your climbing networks and your climbing circles. You're likely taking people out, maybe that have never climbed before, out top roping or whatever on some like mellow terrain. With kids, for example, one of the most annoying self-rescue scenarios with kids is they're really light and they climb on really low angle terrain and they're top roping, and then they don't want to get lowered, and so they'll freeze up on the wall, right? And in order to you can't just give them slack and they come down. They won't do that. So what you can do is do what's basically like a counterbalance. And if the terrain's really easy, I'll just like take my gree and just like belay myself up, counterbalanced against them. When I get to them, I clip to them, and then I wrap, and I'm dragging them down. The rope's moving through. So that's a little self-rescue thing. We can go deeper into that if you guys are interested, but it's less neat as far as big terrain goes. So yeah, there's a couple different methods of doing that. There's even a more complex method of how to, if someone's totally unconscious and you're rappelling with them, we never want to put a load clip to something on a non-releasable system. Right? So keep that in mind. How are you going to clip an unconscious load that you need to release? What are some systems around that? I just want to get you thinking about it. You already have the tools, but there are ways in order to do that. So we're not going to dwell on that too much because there's two other scenarios we wanted to introduce to you, which I think are actually kind of useful for real climbers. And the first one is going to be, how do you rappel further than half your rope length? Has anyone been in a situation like that before? Yeah. What did you do?
We took our cordage and like kind of offset the rope and then connected two ends of the rope with, I forget what kind of knot, but cool. Yeah, got a little extra rope. And then at the top, I think we closed it off with like a clove or something, so it's like locked on one side.
Sweet. Yeah, so it's gonna be basically a reef schnur. And I think kind of starting out with this, I'll be kind of the guinea pig here. If you know that the rope is half the rope length is shorter than the length of the rappel, and you're going to the ground, it's often a decent idea to send someone down on the end of the rope first, and then the person up here kind of take note of how much difference there is there, and we'll kind of show that, and then outside of that we'll kind of show how to retrieve it. So go from there.
This is what we were alluding to. So we're up at the anchor. Set Brett up for a lower. And the lower effectively serves as just like a measuring stick. Kind of like Brett was just talking about. That's backwards. Like Brett was just talking about, like we need to know, we want to know rather exactly how much rope we need to get down this thing. And I can kind of kill two birds with one stone by lowering him, getting him down the pitch, and then figure out like what I've got left. Okay, here we go. Lowering, 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 lowering. Cool. Well,
I'm gonna mark height point.
Sure. I don't actually know where it is on this thing. It's just like random chopped rope.
Just put a
Yeah.
overhand in.
Yep.
This is the middle.
Well, I'm gonna put it on your side probably because.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Totally. Go for it.
We'll just. Okay, you get the idea. You understand how a lower works. I'm just gonna take it off.
So I got to the ground safe, but Max has realized that the midpoint of the rope is on my side of the climbing rope.
One time I find myself using this a lot is if like I don't know exactly how long it is. I'm like, I think I can do it, but I'm not sure. It's like might be like 33 meters or it might be 30. This is a really good way to check. And if you've got a good middle marker, then you'll either like go through the device, in which case you need to do what I'm about to show you, or it won't go through the device, in which case you can just proceed like normal. But let's say the middle marker is here, and the thing I'm rappelling off of, like we'll say this is the rappel ring here. And the rope is not going to reach.
This is middle.
Yep. So what I can do is take a locking carabiner and a clove hitch and just clip that there and lock it. You see how that just like locks down on itself? And then one consideration is kind of what's going on up here. Like the best case scenario is a small quick link, like these steel things that are on most of the anchors, because this knot's gonna like jam into it, but not like get pulled inside of it. Whereas this thing, like this could happen. And what you'll find is pretty hard sometimes to get it started. Like I'm gonna rappel on this and put a lot of weight on it. And it's gonna be really difficult for me when it comes time to pull the rope and retrieve things to like pop that out of there. But we'll talk about how to do that in a bit. So point being, I'm gonna rappel a single strand, right? I'm not incorporating this into the system because at some point I'm gonna come up short. So what I'll do is, I'm not gonna demo it right now just because there's a knot in the middle of the rope and I don't think it'll like be that informative because you all understand how to do an extended rappel. I'm gonna rappel down this, and at some point before I reach the ground, I'm gonna have the end of the rope, right? Like so. And so what I'll do is I'll take like anything I got left. And at this, like before Brett and I part ways, he's gonna give me all of his slings and quick draws he's got. Like I'll have all of the anchor stuff. And I'm just gonna start making a big macrame of climbing gear. I'll wrap down a little further. Take this knot out. I would take one of the quads that we had, put that on until I'm down on the ground. Here comes time. I know, the rope is moving. It's exciting. And then, oh, that knot's gonna like totally hose us. Just pretend this is a middle marker and not the knot. Down like so.
And that pulls all the way through. So there's like a load side and there's like a tag side. The tag side doesn't need to have anything like structural on it.
This needs to be strong enough for you to go like this.
So what are some other things outside of your slings, of your cordelettes, of your 45 Crucics and extra long personal anchor systems?
Pullover.
Your pullover.
Shoelaces.
Your shoelaces. Your pants. Like,
and you do want to be careful because like I said, sometimes it can jam in there. And if it's not strong enough for you to really crank on it, like I've definitely had to like put a gree on the whatever it was I was pulling on, like it was a tag line, and like sit hard and like bounce with my whole body weight. And if you use shoelaces, they're gonna break.
Yeah.
So like, you know, the flow chart is start strong and get weaker as you go.
So whatever you got left.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, we always carry like sun hoodies can be pretty long when you like do them right. So yeah, little thoughts on that are things that can be useful for that. And that's also the same system how people climb big routes with like a short single and like a long compact tagline in similar systems.
And you can even really geek out on it. And like, if you know, it's like mostly like 30 meter wraps, but there's this one like, you know, 35 meter or 40 meter wrap. You just need to carry 10 meters of extra stuff. So if you have like 10 meters of 6 mil cord, that will get you where you need to go.
It's so much lighter too.
Exactly. Than carrying like a whole other rope up there.
Yeah. I think it's pretty common in canyoneering.
Oh, okay.
People do that.
Totally.
And to overcome that initial pull you were talking about before, like just clove onto a big carabiner, so you have like a giant handle to pull from, and that keeps you from like your hand feeling all crappy after.
Oh yeah, that's where I like the gree or progress capture pulley. Same thing. You can like put it gives you something to grab, and it puts your whole weight into the system.
Cool.
So I'm belaying Brett up. He's over it. This is a really heinous rope. And so the first thing I'm going to do is build my lower prior to jerry rigging anything up here. I'm running low on lockers, so I'm going to double up here to save locking carabiners. And like one nice thing about this is I need to do this anyway, and it's also going to allow me to go hands-free. Okay, cool. And so basically what I need to do is remember very beginning of the day, I was like, don't clip in with a one-handed clove when you're the follower. Remember why? I'm going to do that, and it's just going to make it so I can just lower Brett. Needs to be a locker. So I'm going to put it there. Got my system closed. I'll be like, okay, Brett, stand up. Okay, lean back. That was way easier, right? Than like what we showed you earlier. But it's critical that the person can stand up. So like one thing you could do is like you can lower someone a little bit by just rocking the carabiner. You can maybe like lower them to a stance or a bolt, and they can clip into that and stand up, and then you can do it that way. Or if they can't and they're just like totally smoked, then you're gonna have to do this. Or sorry, not do this, do the first thing we showed you.
Two or three Craggin Classics ago right here. I was climbing with one of my other reps up Zebra Zion. He just had a normal ball cap on, and I was belaying on top of pitch 4, just belaying normal. And he's climbing, and it got windy, and his ball cap like flew off his head and landed like down on a ledge below him. And he's like, "Dude, my hat." I was like, "Oh, no big deal. Like, can you just give me a little slack?" And I did that. And he's like, "Oh, sweet." He went down, he grabbed his hat, and then I just undid it. I'm like, "Okay, climb back on." So it's like a very simple thing. It doesn't have to be like ultra crazy self-rescue.
So you put a bite through one on your belay loop, and then you bend the rope like so to almost create another bite. And the second carabiner clips that. And if you had a third carabiner, you would basically move it here. But this is totally adequate. The concern here is if I'm not careful, I might run the brake strand over my belay loop, right? the two things. One, it's not under load. It's like just the grip of my hand. So it's not actually going to wear it out that much. It's not that hard to just keep that from happening like this. But if you have a third carabiner, I'd totally do that. Extended. Yeah. But yeah, this is a really good one because like your other option is a munter, right? Mm-hmm. And a munter is going to twist your rope horribly. Like it's just real bad. Like you just don't want to do it. You can use 1 strand, 2 strands, kind of whatever. Yeah.
Go there.
Yeah. But then I'm just going to take like another carabiner.
Yeah. Quick draw or something.
Yeah, probably just a single carabiner. Okay. And like put that on the rope that's holding him up.
And right now they're tied in as climbers, so they're just on a figure 8, and then you run up to them and ascend to the rope. So this isn't the case where like someone's stuck on the wall and we have to go up to them and help them.
This is like, so if
and we've
kind of talked a couple times about like you rappelled down to someone that you're then going to raise. Mm-hmm. I would do this for sure because they're probably just like ragdolling and they will actually perish if they like remain limp.